It was 2019 when the Kia Telluride and Hyundai Palisade came on the scene and shook up the SUV market. Now, even though they're virtually identical underneath, the Telluride has always outsold the Palisade. Although for 2026, I have a sneaking suspicion that that may change.
This is the all-new 2026 Hyundai Palisade. It starts at 39 grand, and this top-of-the-line Palisade calligraphy model tops out at about $58,000 with destination. Today I'm going to show you all the features of this new model, including how well it fits a bike in the back, and then we're going to take it for a drive, and I'll explain why I think it can actually topple the Telluride.
So what have they changed for 2026 exterior-wise? Well, all of it. This is a ground-up second-generation model. This isn't just a year-over-year refresh. So it looks significantly different, and I think significantly improved compared to the previous model. Now, what do you think? Leave a comment below as to whether or not you like the looks of this thing. But I see a lot of Range Rover in this vehicle. It has a more upscale look to it than the previous generation model, at least in my eyes. The front headlights and the rear tail lights look fantastic. I love how they sort of complement each other shape-wise. Being that this is the calligraphy, it does get some unique styling, like the grille is a bit different. You get unique calligraphy wheels, and also these wheel arches are painted to match the exterior, which I think elevates it compared to the base model, which are just black units. Now, why do I think that this may outsell the new Telluride? Well, the images I've seen of the new Telluride, it doesn't look all that different than the previous model. This, to me, is a big upgrade, and I think it may do just enough to put it over the edge sales-wise. Now, since this is a new model, it won't be surprising that this has a different engine than the previous model, but it's not all good news. This actually makes less horsepower than the previous model, and that's because this is a 3.5 liter versus the old model 3.8 liter. It is still a naturally aspirated V6, however, and it gets a automatic transmission with 8 gears. We'll have to see out on the drive whether or not that slightly less displacement makes much of a difference. The good news, however, is that if you want, you can step up to a hybrid powertrain. So options are always nice. Now, in terms of fuel economy, this model specifically does pretty decent at 18 city, 24 on the highway. Let's talk interior. And you know what? If you've been in a Kia or Hyundai recently, this will not really surprise you. But if you haven't in a while, you're really going to be blown away in this vehicle. I mean, I really do feel like this is best of class, certainly in terms of design. And I think the biggest place that Kia and Hyundai have come recently, or the biggest stride that they've made, is they've been making good designs for a while. The technology has been good for a while, but the build quality really seems to have gotten a lot better. And like I said, really best of class, at least in my opinion. I mean, just look at this design. It's very interesting. It has levels to it. There's backlighting. Obviously, you have different uses of material, different textures, different colors. It blows you away that this is a Hyundai in modern age. And the best part about it is that it's not just designed for the sake of design. It's extremely usable. Physical controls here for, most of your major stuff, certainly volume, temperature control. There are some buttons here that are on the screen, but they're fixed whenever the car is on, so no problems there. And I do really like this implementation that they've been doing on pretty much all their new models for the gear select, where it's just a turn of this knob here, and you go backwards to go in reverse and press this button for park. Really intuitive. You never have to look at what you're doing. You never have to look at the gear indicator and say, am I in the right spot? Works so well. Sound system in here is a Bose sound system. Sounds quite good. Giant screen, of course, because everyone has a giant screen, but like I said, it works well. It's really simple layout to be able to get through the menu structure, wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, wireless phone charger. There's a bunch of ports in here to charge your phones. I mean, I feel like I'm just gushing over this interior, but like truly, it is fantastic in here. And it really all comes together with these seats, which are quite nice as well. I'm pretty impressed with the at least initial quality of this leather or faux leather. Of course, it's not really real leather, but it feels soft. It feels supple. The seat is really quite large, so not something to hug you in. At least me as a skinny fellow, this doesn't hug me in very well, but it is comfortable, and you have lumbar support, which is something that I always go on about. But the back seats as well, there's plenty of room back there. This is definitely usable as a 3-row vehicle. Of course, you can put children back there, but you can fit smaller adults back there as well. Like I said, overall, this is just an incredible part of modern Hyundais and Kias, and really is a big selling point. Now, before we go out on a drive, let's try and throw a bike in the back to see how much room there is in the back before we finally get this thing out on the road.
Before we throw a bike in the back, it's worth noting that all of the seats in this model are power operated, for better or worse. I guess typically you would say that's nice, but they're very slow to move, so sometimes it's a bit annoying. That said, it does make it easy, and once the seats are down, there's a ton of space in the back, making this an extremely useful people and item hauler. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss future content.
Time for a drive in the Palisade, and you know what? We've said nothing but good things about this vehicle in terms of the exterior, the way it looks, in terms of the interior, the design, the way it functions. And there's plenty good about this driving experience, but unfortunately, I kind of have to start with one of the cons of this vehicle, and one of very few, to be honest with you, and that is this engine and transmission combo. We've already talked about how this is the 3.5 liter. It used to be a 3.8 liter, so less displacement. It makes a little less horsepower, and it's noticeable. The fact that it only makes just a few less horsepower is not a big deal, but realistically, this has gained quite a few pounds, several hundred pounds actually. So it just frankly feels slower than the last generation model, and at times feels very sluggish. Now, fortunately, we have driving modes, and typically I think driving modes are kind of like a hoax to some extent, like, yeah, put it in sport mode, like whatever, especially on vehicles like this. But in my opinion, you almost have to drive it in the sport mode, because otherwise this transmission is just so lazy. It's lazy to shift. It's the throttle response is really lazy in normal mode. Normal mode in this car feels like eco mode in most other vehicles. So I feel like I have to step up to sport, which feels like normal mode in regular vehicles. And once you do that, it does drive a lot better. Doesn't solve the speed factor really, but the transmission wakes up a little bit and it's a little more lively. Now, the problem I have with that is the driving modes does not persist through key cycles, meaning that when I turn the car off, turn it on, it reverts back to normal mode, which is a problem given that I don't like driving it in normal mode. So every time I have to press this button to put it in sport mode, like, not a big deal of all things, but it is annoying to have to do that. So that said, like I said, the speed, I will say it's barely adequate. It's not a deal breaker. It's not that slow, but we are up here at 6,000 feet of elevation, and naturally aspirated motors, of course, make less horsepower up here. So maybe it's a little bit more noticeable up here, but I would call it barely adequate. Not a deal breaker. It is enough to kind of get you where you're going, but you do wish you want more. And that's where I think the hybrid version would really come into play. But let's talk about that towards the end of the video. Now, I've kind of got the bad stuff out of the way, and to be honest, that's really it, because the rest of this driving experience is excellent. We're doing highway speeds right now. It is so quiet. Very little wind noise, very little road noise. It is just a very refined experience. The suspension itself is excellent. They know Kia and Hyundai are doing a really good job on these types of vehicles. They don't try and make it overly sporty. They don't make it stiff and ruin the ride. It is so soft. Maybe almost slightly on the too soft side, but I think it's okay for this type of vehicle. And I say slightly on the too soft side because to a certain extent, you do lose a little bit of body control when you start going around some more, lively corners or anything like that. But it's still plenty good for like what people are going to be using this for, which is hauling your kids around to soccer practice and to the mall and things like that. And what you want a suspension to do in that category is soak up bumps, and it absolutely does that. It just kind of floats over stuff. Like I said, very soft. That part is very good. The rest of this, is intuitive to use. It has driving aids that work quite well. I will say one of the things I probably should have mentioned when we were covering the interior, even though it's technically on the exterior, I do find the way it goes about the door handle opening, like, most cars these days, you just roll up to the door handle, you put your hand on the door handle, it unlocks the door. I'm full throttle right now trying to keep up with these people that are definitely not full throttle. But when you put your hand on a door, it should unlock and everything. And many manufacturers, almost every manufacturer has that technology now. But for some reason, Kia and Hyundai, it doesn't work quite well for me. Like I put my hand on the door and it doesn't unlock, and then I take my hand off and it unlocks, and then I put my hand on and it locks. Like it's unintuitive. But the rest of the technology in here, in terms of the driver aids, the lane centering, while a bit busy, does work well. The adaptive cruise control, which of course is included, that works well. On a highway setting like this, you could really just kind of lean on the cruise control type stuff, and it will be very nice in terms of not tiring you out on a long road trip. So that technology works really well. There's not much else to say about this. Like I said, the only bad part I've really had is this engine transmission, made better by the driving modes, but I wish they could change that to persist through driving more, or just like kind of move the driving modes. Once again, sport should really be normal should be eco. I think they could just, that's all software tuning, right? So something that they could potentially update in the future. But overall, I'm super impressed with this thing in this category of vehicle, with things like the Traverse, the Highlander, the Pilot. There's some really good vehicles. I mean, all those ones that I just mentioned are really good, but this thing is up there, man. And what I will say is, in terms of which one I would get, I would try and, of course, keep the options list low, as I kind of always say. But that said, I would definitely be willing to spend the money on the hybrid, because I think you're going to get all of this, the great suspension, the great looks, the great interior, the great design, but with a more responsive engine because of the electric motor and just more horsepower in general. So I do think the hybrid is actually the way to go when it comes to the, well, I almost said Telluride, the Palisade, which is probably going to be the case for the Telluride as well. So that's what I think about it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I appreciate you guys for watching. If you stayed around this long, consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Peace.